Всем привет, это проект
Hello,
Alpha.
everybody. This is War Diary with Nikolai Feldman and Alexey Arestovych. Hello, guys. Let's start with Operation in Kursk, how things changed. A week ago, we talked about other topics, but I think this is a rather big success of armed forces of Ukraine and Ukrainian counter intel services, because our task is to pretend we're weak, right? If you were following Sun Tzu. Do you agree? Well, we need to say a lot of things on this topic, so let's start with something. First of all, it is the biggest failure of Russian Federation, comparable with the beginning of this war, when their plan to quickly punish the Ukrainians fell and burned and crashed. We have not seen so upset and so lost Putin and his power ministers, so much lies and such discombobulated propaganda. Today, Russian television is showing the videos of Ukrainian special forces, 73rd Brigade, 73rd Group, about a year ago, when they destroyed Russian opponents almost point blank. And back a year ago, they were trying to peddle it as if it was execution of disarmed, but no, they were both armed parties, just an effective maneuver of special forces. And now they're dusted off the same video and presenting it as their activity against the dumb Ukrainians. So we're seeing Russia being a dumb and very clumsy monster. It'll be an interesting stream today. We'll be both exciting and cooling down some things. What's the power of dumb and clumsy monsters? They're like a steamroller. They're like an asphalt roller. If you put it on a high heel and let it roll down, it'll likely flatten a lot of things unless it crashes into a similar size structure. But when one needs to improvise and make fast decisions, or when you're also not in the maximally favorable conditions, but more sporty ones, things start to break. I talked about that with Yuri Romanenko on Friday, and I'll repeat that again here because our audiences may be different, but this thought needs to be pinned. The point that this war was put in the most favorable conditions for Russia by our allies, Russian allies, the whole world, and this is due to Russian diplomacy, Russian politics. They figured a way to provide the most favorable conditions for themselves. We can talk at length about that, but the key condition for them is that they figured a way to gather as many troops as they thought they needed, drop them onto Ukraine and use them as they wanted. And they put themselves in a condition, in a most favorable condition, and the world glumly agreed with this. And Russia was basically as a customer in a restaurant, rotating the plate and figuring out which side to take a bite from the meat patty on it. And we were in most unfavorable conditions from the beginning. Even the armed forces, we did not have enough. They had 330,000 attacking us, if we include so-called Donetsk and Lugansk republics. We had 1.2 million after we mobilized everything, but on the front line we had fewer than them on the line with the hot war action. Or we had either fewer or at best matching. Why? Because we were surrounded by Russian or Russian allies' border on 5/6 of our border. And we have to hold thousands of our fighters with equipment, full-blooded brigades in different parts of the border. And we cannot use them on the actual hot front, on Donbass and on the south. So that's why they have local advantage by numbers, by equipment in aviation and others. There was a brief period before their mobilization when they were lacking in human resources, but even then they had advantage in arms and equipment. And in these conditions, of course, one can fight and one can advance. It's easier to do it when you can use gliding bombs to destroy the opponent's townships and cities, or you can use strategic missiles at any target on the territory of Ukraine, unpunishable. And it took Ukraine some time to figure out how to solve two things at the same time: to ensure that the Western allies should not be afraid and need to provide more support, and second, to figure out how to use long-range arms. That's the key to this war. I'll tell you that we'll be talking a lot about this Kursk operation There's a lot to be discussed there. I think we'll dedicate a couple more streams at least to that operation. But it already seems to me that this is a special operation on convincing the West to allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons on the territory of Russia. Why? We're showing them, see, we took 1,000 square kilometers, and they're doing nothing in Kremlin. And you're afraid to allow us to use, not you, but us to use your weapons on the territory of Russia proper. There are no red lines. There is nothing to be afraid of. Understandably, nothing is so simple, and Russia is bartering the certain conditions by America or prohibitions of use American troops for some elements of the conflict in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine and Iran. But right now, according to Russia's doctrine, it is about time to use some of their nukes. But they're not even talking about that. That means that we crossed the red line, but the red line was not there. Red line is good when it's there, right? But it's bad when it isn't, when they need it. So here, it seems to me that if we're talking about vectors, let's go through all of them. The main and the most important message to the West is that Russian Federation can be beaten and should be beaten on its own territory. There are no red lines. That Russia has used everything in this war they could use, except for nukes. And they already know the answer of the world to their potential use of nukes. We talked through that many times. And they're concerned about using it. They don't want to use it. Don't want to reaction or overreaction from United States or NATO or Europe or no-fly zone over Ukraine. So it's a factor. And the other side of that equation is also best friends, or how the Russia is saying best friends, India and China. They are really against the use of nukes. And if Russia will quarrel with them, then they will not have a place to send their great trade ships to. So their trade and their last glimpse of income and acquisition of technologies will disappear. Now, look, that's the vector towards the West. I want to say at the get-go, so whatever Russian propagandists are going to say that it was Britain who prepared this operation or Americans and that Ukrainians can never do that, none of our allies knew about this operation. None. It was a shock for them. I'm overseas, I'm with our allies, and they were all shocked. I'm witnessing that. Nobody knew. Neither guys in uniforms, nor guys in political suits, or the ones in civilian clothes, but they have a uniform underneath it. Nobody in think tanks, nobody in parliament, nobody was aware of that operation being prepared. Moreover, not all Ukrainian political powers and enforcement agencies were aware of that. And that played actually in a good favor. A part of our enforcement agencies was completely cut off from the information about this operation. We're not going to declare which one, but both times when this group of agencies knew, our operations met Russian resistance 500 yards from the point where they were going to attack. So we're not going to name that agency yet, but where Legion Freedom of Russia and Russian Volunteer Corps, when they did incursion into the Russia proper, they met resistance in the areas where they were planning to go to. So very few knew about it, and we showed that it's doable. You can look at Russia, absolute loss, and they're smitten. Recently, you saw the video of Putin talking to the governor of Kursk district, who was saying that Ukraine is already controlling over 20 settlements, and Putin was abruptly disrupting his speech and saying, no, don't talk about military stuff, talk about economy. So he doesn't feel comfortable about it. And his recent statement that Russia is not going to do any negotiations with the country that is conducting military offensive near the civilian townships and near the nuclear power station, well, everybody understands that is exact mirror-like situation of what Russia was doing in Ukraine. They fought near the Chernobyl nuclear plant. They flew over and did maneuvers over Rovinska nuclear station, and also down south And I'm not even talking about the power lines going from these nuclear stations to our energy systems, because when you destroy those, you can actually cause irrecoverable harm to the nuclear power plant too. And I'm not even going to bring up the matter of the lives of civilians, because we've all seen what Russia was doing here. That means that they failed to find their own words, their own meanings in this situation, and they just picked at what they exactly were doing. And that is the usual trend of their propaganda. Very often they are doing that somewhat relaxed manner, somewhat thuggish manner. But here we can see that they're at a loss. So we can say that we have won the cognitive warfare at this stage. And one can say that cognitive warfare is a higher rank of war than the physical war. It's written in 4 doctrines of Russia, China, NATO, and the United States. Information warfare is one level, and above that is a cognitive warfare, affecting the ideas and thoughts of your enemy. And this is more important than any other sphere below it. So right now they're in utter cognitive defeat. On the level of their highest political leadership, on the level of their president, they are smitten, and we have won this operation on the cognitive level. One of the reasons why it happened is our information support. The operation itself is crafty. First time the incursion happened on the territory of Russia since the Second World War. We can probably count the Mansky incident since 1944 when we can count that, but Donbass was probably a Chinese territory originally, so we can say that maybe China was trying to get their own back. But so since 1944 proper, that is the first time foreign power invaded the Russian territory, and Zelensky was in the media silence, and Syrsky did not support anything. Only today they came out and said that, yeah, it is our troops. This is a classic Boyd's loop. And in the first few days, while the destiny of this operation and the success of it was not defined, we have maintained silence. So now we can say that Russian propaganda had nothing to build their structure against or around. The first few days, we didn't even give them any straw to grasp on in their cognitive defeat. We were just keeping silence. And we can see how strong centralized country is completely crumbling in this situation. Their military bloggers were the first ones to review the situation. They attacked the bloggers, then they made helter-skelter attempts on the media to say that there is no operation. Then local powers came out and said, no, there is actually an operation happening. And you can see almost live on the television when somebody is saying, no, there is no actions near that settlement, near the township, and then the other person comes in with the video and says, no, listen to that, they're actually fighting right now. So it's been a week of this operation, and they're still gathering their wits about it. They started the martial law in Kursk district on the second day of the operation. They installed the counter-terrorist operation on the fourth day of the operation. So it means that they transitioned the ownership of this operation. Counter-terrorist operation is an operation conducted by FSB. So they transitioned the ownership from Defense Ministry to the FSB. And the question then, okay, if you manage to defeat Ukrainian troops here and will continue the incursion back into Ukraine, who will be doing it? FSB still? Or you'll have to give up the rights to that operation back to military? This is the crisis at their operational level, at their management leadership boat. They have a fever and they don't know, they're just throwing that as a hot potato from one org to another. So this all doesn't help them to solve it. And that fever that now the bear is seriously ill with, plus one more very important factor to the previous one we discussed. And we can say that the combination of that is the ones that are leading to their defeat in this operation. You can also notice one more thing. Damned enemies entered Russia proper, but you don't see any Molotov cocktail, any trees fallen across the road, across the highway, nothing. Mom. Russians are not resisting as people against that. You remember the first day of this war when Russia invaded and every second window was throwing something at the invaders. The trees were across the roads. Remember Sumy district defense? There were no military there. To the east of there were some military groups on the border with Poltava district, but Sumy themselves are almost entirely, with very few exceptions, is entirely civilian defense operation. And they fought off the elite troops of Putin. We cannot say anything here. But here on our operation in Kursk, you can see some grannies on the video who are saying, I'm not a Ukrainian, but I know how to speak Ukrainian, guys, can you give me a lift? So what does it remind us about? It reminds us about Prigozhin's march to Moscow. Same chaos. Inability to stop a column of 2,000 armed troops going towards Moscow, who have captured the headquarters of a military district, which, by the way, has access to nuclear arms and can use them against. And what? If Prigozhin himself would not surrender, they would have likely succeeded, or we would have seen an interesting show. And here we can see that the population is not really resisting our activities in Kursk. Remember Rostov, when the mutiny was over, police was coming back, population was sending them back and shouting them Ukrainian curses at the police, while they were still actively taking pictures with Wagner troops. So we can also draw some parallels with Kursk incident of Kursk submarine 20 years ago. Putin started his career as the defender of a simple Russian citizen. So he came with the agenda that he will put all these Khodorkovskys and Berezovsky like oligarchs who are torturing supposedly Russian people. He will tame them, and then he looked to the West and said, okay, my new mission is to defend you from the West. I'm going to defend you from the encroachments of the West. Today we have 44 Russian townships occupied by Ukraine, and he fails to do anything. He's at the top of the government pyramid of lies, but the main thing is that people are not getting up in arms to defend him or his government. So we can state here that at the 24th year of his leadership, Russian Federation is, let's put it this way, nomenclature special services net thrown over the peoples of Russian Federation. And people can support it as long as that net is successful and giving some kickbacks back to people. But when it's losing, people are openly giddy about it. And at best, they're taking neutral position. And there's no unity between the leadership of Russian Federation and its people. What are they usually bringing up their kids on and their people on? The examples from the Second World War, examples from earlier Minin and Pozharsky, when the country was standing as one against the foreign enemies, the Patriotic War of 1812. First World War, they were also trying to call Patriotic War. They just named it Imperial War when Bolsheviks won. Second World War, they call it Great Patriotic War. But if you look at the history, 5.5 million of prisoners of war who surrendered to German troops, that's roughly the numbers of their Soviet Union professional army. The entire army pretty much surrendered. If you recall even Napoleon times when he was going towards Moscow, peasants and just general people in Russia were advising his troops and were using opportunity to take stock of all those lords who were pressing them and whom they were not much in favor of. So Russian model, as is once again highlighted with these events. And it's not only under Putin, it's the model that was there for several centuries. A very simple model. If the power in the country, which is considered still to be somewhat external to the people, if it's successful, then they do support it. If not, they don't. When Nicholas II abdicated himself from the throne of Russia, which group was the first to denounce him? Russian Orthodox Church. They removed his throne from their gathering place, from the place where they were doing meetings and rituals. So that's when people saw that the church turned away from the Tsar, so everybody else turned away from him. All his commanders, of military commanders, navy commanders, they all abdicate. They all denounced him. Only one, Nakhichevan Khan, stayed as his ally for much longer. So Putin is in his position where he, in his words, displaying care about his people, that he is winning, that he is driving the events. That's what he wants. That's what he needs to run the country. You remember his talks to people, that he's saying that, yeah, they're increasing government support programs and all that. All these people are betraying him now. Same way as they betrayed the Tsar, as they betrayed Soviet Union when it fell apart. Remember, when it fell apart, nobody came out to the streets to support it. The way they betrayed the Moscow Tsarship before. Russians feel this power as external, as alien. They have nothing in common with it. And all these orthodox staples that the Tsar is the messenger of God, how many times these Tsars were repudiated, or they were abandoned, or they were killed. The only thing that allows Russian to somewhat support his power, the authorities of the country, is when they're steamrolling over somebody and the Russians are getting some kickbacks. Remember how Germans were fighting for Germany in the Second World War. They were much more fanatical in defending their country. Even after Hitler's death, they were fighting for Berlin. Very often, people are saying that Hitler bought the citizens with bonuses and everything, but they were genuinely resisting even after his death. If Putin dies or disappears, Russian resistance, Russian war will be ended very quickly. There may be another junta that will get the power after, and they may restart that steamroller, but definitely nobody is going to support his initiatives. And we're seeing the second experiment confirming that over the last 12 months. At first was Prigozhin, and now the Kursk operation. There is no unity. The main achievement of Kursk operation, that it shed the light on the main mystery of Russian Federation. There is no unity between power and people. And the main Putin staple is that Tsar against the lords, for the people, and with the people against the world. But the people do not see it necessary to support him when he cannot defend himself. So this is a one-side deal. There is no real unity. The main staple of Russian propaganda, that there is some unity between the Tsar and his people, and they can put all the dukes and lords in prison if they misbehave. People are not supporting him, second time in a row over the last 12 months. And the second staple that they keep talking about is that people do love their land and they're ready to die for it. Basically saying that people support their country even without Putin. We have that in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we can say the powers are bad, people are good, the country is good, we'll be defending the country. And some people like me who can say the power is bad, people have certain deficiencies, but the country still needs to be defended. They don't have it. Nobody is fighting for their backyards, for their cows, for their supermarkets, for their houses. We are in pretty much every township. Civilians are resisting. When the enemy came to our land, we're fighting. And that's the Kursk operation revealing, first, no unity between leadership and people, and second, people are not going to defend their country, at least from Ukrainians. Perhaps if there were NATO soldiers, I think that the story would be the same, because they don't feel Russia to be their own. It's been taken away from them. Russians can play a deal that the Soviet Union citizen was playing. As long as the country is successful, yeah, we can cheer. The moment success is gone, we're not supporting it. That's the main achievement of this operation. It revealed how rotten the social system of Russia is. It's utterly rotten. And however we blame our leadership and our President Zelensky with his ruling group and coalition, we are supportive of Ukraine. However, Ukrainians are squabbling between each other and whatever we're saying about the country, we're still for our country. We still stand for it and ready to die for it. They aren't. Most of Russians don't give a shit about the land incursion. and they don't give a damn about regime. At best, they can record a video asking questions of Putin, why you're not defending us? And that's it. That's, I think, the main revelation of the last week. This is a rotten story that was successful for a long time because they have a lot of resources. Why they're still storming Pokrovsk direction, we can talk about the military aspect of this situation, and why have they continued their effort with offensive in other parts of the front, and why United States and China consider them to be a worthy opponent to discuss things with. Because it's a FSB network that is conducting effective management of the country. They have significant resources amassed. They have access to nuclear arms. They have influence on the industries that cannot be ignored. Plus, they have inherited the zones of influence of Soviet Union, so they have to be considered. But their own people do not like them, do not support them. So if this operation was not, it deserves to have been invented. And that's the situation in Russia today. Well, the fact is, Alexey, that this operation was invented, designed in conditions of complete secrecy. And it is being implemented very professionally. I also want to mention a couple of facts of my observations. There are no lines to Kursk drafting points. No civilians are lining up to defend their motherland. There are a lot of messages about civilians fleeing the district. Well, Nikolai, right, not only in Kursk, I get, Kursk district may be in disarray, Ukrainian troops are on the roads, you may be at a difficult position to run to the military enlistment office. But how about Moscow, St. Petersburg, Katerinburg, Perm, Vladivostok, Rostov? Where are those people who would scream, give me a machine gun, I'll go kill them all? On the contrary, Alexei, we have some of the Russian soldiers that we captured during this raid, 20, 21 years old. The guys are telling the information and basically describing that they were promised that they will serve in Moscow district and will never be sent towards anywhere near the border with Ukraine, but here they are defending the border with Ukraine in Kursk district. So conclusion is that Russia is running out of volunteers and proper bodyguards to carry out this function, so they moved these guys without any experience to that area. Yes, that's exactly the point. When I'm talking about maximally advantageous conditions, Russia was allowed to get all these contractors mobilized, Wagnerites and the others, to bring it to the border with Ukraine and then to deploy in Ukraine and use them there. And when we're talking about defending the border, it's roughly 2,500 kilometers. Right now, about 1,000 of those kilometers are active war zone. Russia doesn't have anything to cover that with, because all their troops are here in Ukraine fighting. Now they're talking about reviving the border guards belonging to FSB and giving them equipment and training. And the question comes, okay, so how long it'll take you to revive them, and how big part of a border you're planning to cover with that force? What if Ukraine withdraws from Kursk district? Do you think they will have better guards there next time? They won't. And if they will deploy somebody with experience, somebody strong to the border, then they will slow down their tempo of military incursion in the areas where they're on the offensive, because they'll have to redeploy those troops. Let's go to the military vector, right? Okay, yeah, let's address the military side. So first thing, we don't know still the military targets, the military goals of this operation. It's difficult to plan when everything is covered with the fog of war. The moment you have some confirmation, the moment you have information, then you and your propaganda have something to bite on. We were not giving that in the first days of this operation. If we have told that we're creating a sanitary zone, that we're capturing Kursk nuclear plant, or the goal is to capture Kursk city proper, but the number of factors that will be indicating that it is a lie would be growing, and Russia could have played on that. Misinformation, disinformation takes a bigger effort even to deploy than the real information, because you need to think out a lot of things. how our troops act militarily. They actually are expanding in the depths. So from the military standpoint, the troops are trained and used brilliantly. They're providing enough forces to cover the base of the incursion. They have the aerial coverage with FPV intel, with radio electronic interference, and we can see it goes like a steamroll going into the depth of Russia with a lot of tentacles streaming down the neighboring roads, sensing and feeling where there are enemies, where there are block posts, where there are troops. That's roughly what happened in the previous Kharkov operation, also prepared by Syrsky, by the way. And here the enemy doesn't know what to do. They cannot determine the most important factors for military planning: the direction of the main attack, second, the direction of a secondary attack, and the third, the false actions. You cannot use the limited number of troops, which they were limited in over there, because they don't have enough information and they don't know where to throw their reserves at. And the moment you start using them, the reserves also get under fire and get destroyed en route to their deployment. And here we can outline a few problems. For example, we can see that we are expanding our operation towards the borders of Kursk and Belgorod districts. And now they have to think whether the direction of main effort will be shifted towards Belgorod, with going to the back of Russian troops fighting in Volchansk and creating a hazard for Kharkov. So we're not telling them where, we're making them guess. And they have to deploy their reserves in different places, trying to guess what's the move, what the next move is going to be, where's the main area of attack. We can see that now we have, on the 6th day, we have some elements indicating that there is a slowdown of our operation. So, okay, they had a few days, they are bringing some artillery, some jets to that area of the front. But we're still conducting a maneuver warfare. It's not stationary yet. We're still adding new townships every day. Of course, more time passes, we'll probably bog down there, but okay, so we bogged down. How are they going to take the territory back? They need to bring 2 armies to that area to deal with the group of our troops in Kursk region. If we will occupy the natural barriers there, and there are some, it'll be difficult for them. So this is the failure for them on Donbass if they remove 2 armies from there. This is basically a guarantee that their offensive there will cease, will halt, and perhaps even we will retake the initiative. Because 2 armies is Avdiivka and Pokrovska operations together. So they basically would need to close shop there and move everything to Kursk. That will give our troops some time to respite, to recover, and maybe even go on the offensive. Look, Alexey, with that, the offensive actions, Russia has not halted them in Donbass, right? They're still continuing the effort, exerting the same effort that they've been doing for months, so they continue going for it. So it seems that Russian command is solving a very difficult task, how to demonstrate the same offensive tempo that they were displaying before, but still find enough troops and means to defend Kursk district and not lose them in the process, because several columns were destroyed by our fighters. Well, right, Nikolai. First of all, it's inertia. The size of the front is 2,000 kilometers and overall, and until it gets there and the mechanisms get in working, it'll take some time to move the troops. Now, we also don't know whether we will capture the area of Kursk nuclear power plant, whether we'll continue going towards Moscow, Belgorod, or other places. But what we can say is that a road connecting Belgorod and Kursk, it's already in a dangerous zone that is partly controlled by our fighters. And if we cut it, this is the main line of supply to the Kharkov group of troops. And if Kharkov operation near Volchansk, this is our working hypothesis that so far was successful and in explaining all the factors, that their idea there was to entangle us to afford themselves more successful operation near Kupiansk. So what we're doing now is a mirror-like operation. We are going to the back of their troops and entangling them. And since we're continuing to expand, our operation, our incursion towards the road. And by the way, there's also a railroad there. And then from the point of cutting the logistics and exerting additional pressure on the enemy's supply lines and depriving them of capability to adequately conduct their military operations in the north near Kharkov district, that part of the military plan, I think, is already realized. We can say that it is already successful, and if we continue further, it would be even better. But Kursk and Belgorod, as you can see on the map, that's the road, right? So if we're moving towards Oboyan, you can see the mouse in the center. So if we get there, we'll be behind the back of their Belgorod group. And Russian command will have not too much in terms of options to react to that. They already have weakened the pressure on Kharkov, the number of gliding bombs that they're dropping on that city. Today we had some numbers from the military command. We used to get 70 to 80 bombs a day. Now we only have 10. I have some good friends fighting on Kupiansk direction. They're saying for the third day in a row, fourth day in a row, no bombs. And you know why? We also worked on Lipetsk, and there was a place where they stored those bombs. And for our civilians, let's say they had some workshops where they were remodeling those bombs, and something happened there. And we worked. That was not only in Lipetsk, and we worked on several of those centers. So we can say that it was Kursk-Belgorod, this operation. And we're already achieving goals on the operative and to a degree on the strategic level, where we have access to some targets that have strategic interest. For example, airfields that are used to attack Ukraine territory. So from the military point of view, this operation was designed brilliantly, is being conducted very successfully. Again, I have to cool down a little here. We don't know what will be the end result of it, what Russian command will counter it with. But for now, we are in advantageous position, and Russia is in maximally disadvantageous. A small fractal, inverted fractal from them having an advantageous position for the whole war. And this is just looking at the Group North, from Kursk, Bryansk, Voronezh, Belgorod districts to Kupiansk. And now we have information for the second day already that they are withdrawing troops from Donetsk district to drop them to Kursk. And they'll have to do it, but they'll have to bring a lot. They'll have to bring at least 2 armies to cull our effects there. And that means that the effort in Donetsk and in Zaporozhye district will be, at least in one of those, will be slowing down. And perhaps Russian command will have to completely halt it to the level where they will have to stand in defense position, or at least conduct a much less intensity offensive. And that will allow us to build entrenchments, to fortify our positions, or maybe even to start moving forward. And when people are asking what's the military meaning of this operation, military meaning is defined, first of all, by what will happen to the number of troops engaged on the Russian side, and how many of those troops that will be engaged in Kursk district will be thrown from strategic directions where we have certain issues defending our territory. So, by the way, you can also note that positional stalemate is no more, right? Apparently, the First World War is only in certain pre-configured conditions. The moment we start doing asymmetric actions, a lot of things can happen, and a more interesting, more lightning-like warfare has an opportunity to occur. Russians are pressing through our ranks with a concentration of effort, and we just picked a softer spot and attacked that. And apparently there is no dead end, there is no stalemate. We can, if we have enough decisiveness and enough effort, enough resources aggregated, we can be very effective. And I will make a few compliments to the higher military leadership of Ukraine. You know, I've been criticizing them quite a bit, but when they are making good decisions, I am standing for giving them what they deserve. President Zelensky has huge balls. He demonstrated that again with all his deficiencies, and we have addressed those times and times again, but I don't want to dedicate today's stream to that. This was a step that very few political leaders had balls to decide to go for. Nobody knew how Russia would react. Would there actually be nuclear strike, nuclear retaliation? Nobody knew. Nobody knew if maybe there are other colonels among his personal guard. There were two colonels uncovered as Russian agents, FSB agents, who had a task to destroy, to kill Zelensky. Perhaps there are other sleepers around him, nobody knows. And nobody knew how the West would react, how the Western partners would react, that this operation was prepared and conducted in complete secrecy from them too. He was taking a big risk and he had won so far. We'll see what happens later. So this is a strong story, and he is strong like that. He is strong with being able to make non-standard moves that have strategic meaning. Sometimes he has deficiencies. I can name a deficiency that is balancing this ability of his inability to conduct systemic work that this conflict properly requires, but the fact that he made a brilliant move and the second time during this war demonstrated his ability to make difficult, risky decisions, this is definitely a bonus. And for that, he should probably be placed again on the covers of all the major magazines like Time and such. And there are very few leaders in the second half of the 20th century. Since 1945, you can count them on the fingers of your one hand. And all right, let's also address Syrsky and Yermak, other key figures. How many talks were there that Yermak is a spy? Remember? Yermak knew about this operation from the beginning. I know that for a fact. It wasn't leaked, right? And that operation could have changed the flow of this war. It has that potentiality. If he was any kind of agent to Moscow, he should have told Moscow about that. So when we isolated just one power agency from that information, we got success, but it was not Yermak. I'm not saying he's not a spy, right? But I'm bringing you the facts saying so. And second is Syrsky, right? I wrote again that Central Command is still messy, that he is still pulling apart tank brigades and giving tanks to each platoon. He is still micromanaging, and he's still incapable to organize proper systemic training for armed forces, and there are other deficiencies, but he proved again that counteroffensive and offensive operations he can prepare and he can conduct brilliantly. Kharkov, Kursk and Belgorod, and it deserves to, it behooves the researchers to find who actually was the author of operation, but also at the beginning of March there was an operation against Russian troops near Borodyanka who were amassing for another storming activity. There was a complex artillery and jet aerial strike, and then two of our brigades rolled over. This is like a dream for any commander. I was screaming with delight when I heard that and I saw that picture. I can judge the professionalism of that operation. If it is his, he showed 3 times that he is a fantastic counteroffensive and defensive general. His capabilities there are supreme, and neither Russians nor Ukraine nor others, I think, have a general who can plan operations to that level. The other question is how good of a commander-in-chief he is, but today I want to abstain from criticizing. We will continue criticizing him later, but today let him bask in the limelight. President Zelensky, Andrei Yermak, and Commander-in-Chief Syrsky should be praised today. I'm not even talking about commanders of brigades, the guys who are actually conducting this operation. Of course, today is their honest victory. And I'm one of their major critic agents on the global arena. And I have to say, to give them due, they deserve it. All right, Nikolai, you were conducting a stream. You had a question there. No. I wanted to, and I thought you were done. Right. Okay. So before we're going into the cooldown, let's mark one more thing for our viewers, Alexey. It's related to cognitive warfare, and it puts Russians in a difficult position. The question of mobilization in Russia. Since there are no lines near the enlistment offices, Russia is facing a need to probably conduct a big mobilization campaign, and they're throwing numbers from 500,000 to 1 million people. Stop smiling, Alexey. Do not laugh. These numbers were thrown in Russian propaganda, but they will have to use some arsenal of negative actions, which they initially published and announced during the previous mobilization effort. Then, when we have repeated that, they hit them, and Ukraine actually mirrored a lot of these actions. Russia laughed at us and was continuing to laugh for a while about Ukrainian methods of mobilization, about people running away from those buses, and how human rights are violated, as if everything was okay with human rights in Russia. And now Russia is facing a situation when motherland is in danger, supposedly. Kursk and Belgorod districts are losing their roads by evil Ukrainians who are occupying them and invading. But without 2 million rubles, Nikolai, nobody is eager to go fight for Putin. Frankly, even with 2 million rubles, they don't have enough people now. There are different messages coming out. There are some messages that some people who are 20 days away from the finish of their contract, they actually have generals coming to check how many people are there with 1 month or less left. And they're basically openly telling them, you have 20 days to die for motherland. And people are trying to dodge all these activities, of course, trying to stay alive. So Russian establishment in this situation is facing mandatory mobilization effort that they need to organize, which was organized here in Ukraine with a lot of errors, right? They were laughing that they will never do that. Oh, you mean we'll be laughing at their buses in the near future? Right, I'm not exactly that. I'm thinking they will probably have to laugh at their own buses. Because we don't really care. Well, we'll see, Nikolai. The political machine needs to make a fundamental decision about the continuation of this war. Putin's words about not conducting negotiations with those who threaten nuclear power plant and occupy civilian townships, you can just let it slip. Doesn't matter. This is political reaction, emotional reaction. But they're conducting consultations with China. They're figuring out what to do. And if we're looking at the international diplomatic meaning of this operation, it dismantles the formula of the line. Let's freeze the front line as it is, right? So that one is very questionable now, because now if you freeze the line, we get Kursk district. This is important. This is not finalization. This is not the only plan. There are other plans, but the formula of freezing the front, that one is probably no more. So this is an important achievement. And they will make a decision. We'll see. Whatever decision they make, if they conduct mobilization, of course, it will be unpopular. But the main thing, it will dismantle Putin's plans to rebuild Russia internally as an opposition to the West, because mobilization is so unpopular. It will disrupt the legitimacy of his power. So he'll have to put on pause the cleansing of Ministry of Defense that he is trying to conduct. They had over 60 generals and high-level officials detained. They're rebalancing the power clans. New regional and district elections violations will come to light. And Putin's plan to rebuild Russia to the model that he thinks is most adequate will be put on pause or maybe stop. And the plan to rebuild Russia was designed to be a plan to counter all the sanctions and all the issues Russia is facing now after having invaded Ukraine. So for him and his elite, reconstruction of Russia will be more difficult. It'll be more difficult for him to put the Russia on the rails of general opposition to the West and to the world. And when your opponent is conducting an effort to optimize his efficacy and then has to postpone that and has to react to certain things and maybe think about optimization later, this is a big strategic success. So despite that small operation in Kursk and Belgorod, the size of it, it does have some very good chances, if it leads to Russian mobilization, to become an operation with strategic effects. And then all those who organized it should get 3 Heroes of Ukraine medals, orders. Zelensky, Syrsky, Yermak, anybody else who is involved in design and implementation. But I wanted to talk about what does it mean for us, for Ukraine, if it is interesting. So in the cognitive vector, I would remind once again that cognitive warfare is the senior suit among the wars. With all respect to people fighting on the front, even they acknowledge that cognitive warfare is the ruling suit. So this is an important element to bring to light. So we did talk about them. Now let's look at the Ukrainian side. We have two Ukraines, apparently. We have Ukraine of Sviatoslav the Brave, Ukraine of Aide by Kotarevsky, a literary figure, where we are energetic, non-standard, laughing, with humor, with a Cossack drive. And then there is a Ukraine of crying Catherine, another literature figure, who is always dying, who is always upset about something, who is always defending. And in war, the main principle is always attack, never defend. So this is with most peoples. Peoples have the positive sides and the shadow negative sides. We are at a different position. We are, as people, have been torn away from our sources, and false orientiers were brought to us. Trifecta of Shevchenko, Franco, and Lesia Ukrainka were peddled since Soviet Union times. If I was selecting that, I would say Kotlяревsky would be definitely a figure. Ukrainian literature that was codified in his works. Humor, drive, offensive. I would put Pyotr Sagaidachny instead of Khmelnytsky in that trifecta, and there are more figures that could be brought. But the main point here is that in Kursk operation, after a year and a half of crying Catherine, always on defensive, always unhappy, always unlucky, snots and tears, we saw Ukraine, a glimpse of Ukraine that we saw in the first 5 days of this war. A Ukraine of Sviatoslav, a Ukraine of Aide. Energetic, effective, victorious. And why am I saying we are the nation between two lights? As attractive as our light side is, our people, our nation is a very high level. When we demonstrate our best sides, when we demonstrate that, we are of a very high level. We have the bar set very high and we're following it. And we're just as hellishly horrible when we demonstrate the worst sides of our character. That continuous crying, that can kill anybody, depress anybody, just finish with martyrdom and self-suicide. So what's the tragedy is that the Second Ukrainian Republic, which is a continuation of the First Ukrainian National Republic, which is inheriting features of the first and inheriting a lot of features of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. It has the goal to suppress Sviatoslav and Aide, Ukraine of those figures, to suppress the drive, the humor, the verve, and to keep Ukraine in the crying body of Catherine, because it's easier to steal from those who are crying and those who are oppressed, and those who are upset and at each other's throats. And this is the secret of genre, the secret of our 33 years, or if you dig deeper, since 1917, or if you dig even deeper, even before that. I have said about that before. I don't want to go too deep into that, but what I think we should mark it. We can call it Rus Ukraine, we can say fifth project, we can not give any names, but we need to build a system that at least does not block our drive, does not block our good features. At best, would help them, but for now we have a system that is killing our best features and is peddling the worst ones, because it's easier to make money on people and to corrupt the government in the country. 4.5 million euro in the trunk of the company visiting Minister of Defense, recently uncovered. What's that? That's crying Catherine. That's as an archetype. This is not Aida. This is not Sviatoslav. What would Sviatoslav do with the one who is stealing from the army engaged in war? This is the logic. We're the nation torn apart between these two lights. We're people with torn souls. And everything we need to do, all we need to do, is to peddle the light. Note, the moment we are successful in Kursk operation, we don't hear much about whether we need Bulgakov, what language do you speak, do we need to rename streets. These are all the moanings of Catherine, of crying Catherine. when we're not energetic, when we're not driving, when we're collapsing upon ourselves and eating, devouring ourselves. So we need to do everything to make sure the light sides of our character are propped up, are supported. And the shadow needs to be elevated. As all the yogas and psychologists are saying, you cannot get rid of bad habits, you can develop them. You can evolve them. The problem of Catherine, who suicided herself, and the Greek Antigona, these are two different archetypes from Greek. And this is the struggle of two different archetypes. Ukrainian history, Greeks thought that tragic mythology is an important feature of great nation, a great person, a great history. But in heroic tragedy, there was one important point which Ukrainian tragedy doesn't have. Greek tragedy has cathartic moment when the light was born on a new level. So they get rid of the shadow, get rebirthed, and go on a new level. And Ukrainian tragedy, unfortunately, does not have that cathartic moment. On Shevchenko's literature, one can see that as a very good example. In his life, Shevchenko was very favorable with ladies. He was the favorite guest in top-notch St. Petersburg saloons and high-level societies. He was a dandy of his own time, right? The whole Petersburg were his fans. At the same time, he had a shadow side, where he was crying about the Ukrainian people and their destiny. And he was the person who worked very well with his shadow, and he sublimated it in his creation, in his creative side, in his literature. But for us, it was implemented as the pillar, as the staple. So now we need to rethink all the shadow. And Shevchenko needs to be rethought. And all the school teachers, I beg you, when you present that horror of hopeless Ukrainian literature, please treat it as tragedy, but as a tragedy of the antique type, where there is an exit, where there is a bright side that can end it. Please, I implore you, peddle the bright sides of Ukrainian characters, bright perspectives for the Ukrainian tragedy after cathartic moment. If you do not do that, you have more power than Zelensky, Syrsky, Yermak, and anybody else. You are the creators of victories and defeats, like Churchill wrote in one of his writings, summing up the results of the Second World War. Please make this tragedy with an exit, with the bright future, where there is some optimism. However horrible tragedy is, if it goes through a cathartic moment and then evolves, that's what we need to do. We need to elevate the light. We need to rethink the dark to bring it to light as well. Chop the tail off, work with the shadow, wait till the new one shows up, work it through, bring it up again. And create a country and a system that helps to bring up the creative and the best. And this was in brief, the idea of my fifth project, the idea how I see our country. And now we had a reason to talk about it. You can frankly erase me, take an eraser and erase me from the history. Never mention the fifth project that I'm working on, but just do it for yourself, for your country, for Ukraine. So, however adored and beautiful Ukraine is when it's in the state of driving, and shadowy horrible it is when it's crying, the country that you want to leave. That's why we will be criticizing Ukraine that is crying, that is trying to suicide itself, until it changes its direction, and we'll be praising the bright sides of our country. I'm done on the cognitive warfare, Nikolai.